Everyone, I hope you're all doing well and staying happy and healthy. This video is a summary and analysis of the events in Act 2, Scenes 1 through 6 of Romeo and Juliet. This video is to benefit students as a review tool in preparation for the test, which will follow the completion of reading and the materials for Acts 1 and 2 of the play Romeo and Juliet. This video modernizes the play's language and helps to support learners that are challenged by the original text of the play. This is to be used as a support tool and not a substitution for reading the play. In Act 2, Scene 1, the primary characters speaking are Benvolio and Mercutio. Prior to this scene, Romeo meets Juliet at the Capulet party at the end of Act 1 and is preparing to leave the event with Benvolio and Mercutio. When the scene opens, Romeo runs away from his friends and climbs over the wall, which is surrounding the Capulet property. This places Benvolio and Mercutio in a panicked state as they begin calling out for their friend who has just crossed over enemy lines. As far as highlights in this scene, Mercutio attempts to call Romeo back to them by talking about the physical beauty of Romeo's ex-love interest, which is Rosaline. Mercutio talks about the feminine beauty of Rosaline in a very scandalous way, particularly focusing on her ankles, which should have been covered during this time period, making her sound more like a outlandishly attractive woman for this time period. But Mercutio is playing this up in hopes to upset Romeo. Mercutio and Benvolio at the end of the scene give up their search for Romeo and make a few jokes about how easily Romeo is impacted by his feelings of involving this fruitless love with Rosaline. Act 2, Scene 2. The primary characters in this scene are Romeo and Juliet. Prior to this scene, Romeo climbed over the wall outside of the Capulet property. He had just met Juliet and was falling out of love with Rosaline and falling in love with Juliet. Juliet does not know that Romeo has climbed over the wall and is therefore currently trespassing at the opening of this scene. So once again, Romeo climbs over that wall and he hears Juliet speaking to herself, and he chooses to eavesdrop on her private conversation. The highlights of this scene focus on Juliet revealing that she is in love with Romeo, regardless of his family background. Remember, Juliet is a Capulet and Romeo is a Montague. Romeo jumps out of the bushes below her balcony and confronts her with his mutual love. Romeo tries to swear his love to Juliet by the moon, but she scolds him because the moon is always changing. Through this conversation, they realize that what they both want is a very consistent love, which is being juxtaposed with the fact that the moon has phases and therefore is always changing. At the end of the scene, Romeo and Juliet come to an agreement that Juliet will send the nurse to gather information from Romeo tomorrow about the time and place where they will be married. 2, Scene 3. Our primary characters are Romeo and Friar Lawrence. Prior to the events of this scene, Friar Lawrence is making his appearance for the first time for the audience here. The last time he spoke with Romeo, Romeo was grieving over the heartbreak that he felt for this young lady named Rosaline, who is in fact Juliet's cousin. Rosaline refused to have any kind of romantic situation with Romeo, leading to this brokenheartedness that Romeo felt. So at the opening of the scene, Friar Lawrence is working in his garden, gathering herbs to be used for medical purposes. This is meant to be foreshadowing within the play for acts to come. As far as the main highlight in this scene, Romeo finds Friar Lawrence and tells him that he would like the priest to marry Romeo and Juliet. Friar Lawrence is shocked, to say the least, and scolds Romeo for rushing from one relationship to another. At the end of the scene, Friar Lawrence does agree to marry Romeo and Juliet, as he believes this will be the needed force to encourage the families, meaning the Capulets and the Montagues, to forget their current feud. To Scene 4. Our primary characters are Mercutio, Benvolio, Romeo, and the nurse. Prior to this scene, Benvolio and Mercutio have been waiting for Romeo ever since he ditched them after the Capulet party. At the beginning of this scene, Benvolio reveals to Mercutio that Tybalt has challenged Romeo to a duel by sending a letter to the Montague house. Mercutio says that this could be dangerous for Romeo, as Tybalt is an excellent swordsman. The highlights of this scene focus on Romeo reappearing after his late-night adventure and reassuring Mercutio that he is in a much better mood now through jokes and humorous interactions. The nurse appears in town looking for Romeo and is immediately harassed by Mercutio. Mercutio, Benvolio, and many of the other gentlemen who are hanging out and are friends with Romeo take part in making fun of the nurse. At the end of the scene, Romeo reassures the nurse that he is a good person, and he tells the nurse to hurry home to Juliet and tell her this important news and to take a rope ladder with her. Romeo's instructions are that Juliet should arrive at Friar Lawrence's church that afternoon to be married and then hang the ladder over the balcony so he can come spend the night with Juliet. To Scene 5. The primary characters in this scene are Juliet and the nurse. Prior to the events of this scene, Juliet has been patiently waiting all morning for the nurse to return and is eager to hear the news about Romeo. At the opening of the scene, Juliet compares the nurse to an old and slow-moving version of Cupid. When the nurse finally does arrive, she is tired and out of breath, which only upsets Juliet more because Juliet has been waiting around all this time. The highlights of the scene are that the nurse is old and therefore needs to rest prior to telling Juliet about the wedding plans, and the nurse does seem to be stalling in this scene. She doesn't seem to want to tell Juliet the news about Romeo. She keeps putting it off, saying that her back hurts, her head hurts, she's tired, she's out of breath. But she does ask if she can speak with Juliet's mother, seeing as it's a conflict of interest for the nurse to help Juliet when the nurse knows that Juliet is technically betrothed to Paris. At the end of the scene, the nurse eventually gives in and tells Juliet that she must hurry to church in order to meet Romeo, there to be married.
Veni creator spiritus, mentes tuorum.
To Scene 6. This is the last scene in Act 2. Our primary characters are Romeo, Juliet, and Friar Lawrence. Prior to these events, Romeo has been waiting for Juliet to arrive at the church and has been speaking with Friar Lawrence about the wedding plans. At the opening of the scene, Friar Lawrence reminds Romeo of the importance of loving moderately and that anything done with too much haste can result in negative consequences. He compares this to igniting gunpowder or having too much of something that could be good for you, but anything in excess can easily become bad for you. Unfortunately, Romeo tells Friar Lawrence that with Juliet as his wife, nothing can go wrong, and therefore Romeo has learned nothing from Friar Lawrence's words of wisdom. He is still just as reckless as he was at the beginning of the play. At the end of the scene, Juliet arrives, and immediately the two young lovers are expressing PDA, or public displays of affection. Friar Lawrence is very concerned about their behavior and feels it is best that he married the two quickly, as he does not trust them alone.